Hello, I'm Helaine Silverman, professor of anthropology at the University of Illinois and co-director of the Mythic Mississippi project. I'm very pleased to introduce my colleague, Dr. Bruce Michelson, Professor Emeritus of English at the U of I. Dr. Michelson is a world-renowned expert on Mark Twain, and among his books are Mark Twain on the Loose and Printer's Devil, Mark Twain and the American Publishing Revolution. Dr. Michelson is a former president of the Mark Twain Circle of America and a former president of the American Humor Studies Association. I'm truly grateful to Dr. Michelson for agreeing to record this talk about Mark Twain for the Mythic Mississippi project. I'm sure that you will find it fascinating.
Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, didn't start writing seriously about the Mississippi River until he was 40 years old, in the middle of the 1870s. He wrote the Old Times on the Mississippi essays for the Atlantic Monthly in 1875, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer in 1876. He published Life on the Mississippi, a sprawling book, 600 pages, in 1883. And then in 1884, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So Mark Twain was writing about life along the river in what we might think of as a late afternoon or an early twilight in a golden time for the Mississippi and the history of the United States. These were the decades starting from that burst of action around the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, and with the coming of steam-powered navigation very soon after, and closing with the triumph of our national railroad systems as the new connective tissue for the American continent. In other words, when Mark Twain rose up as a kind of poet laureate for the Mississippi region, that landscape was already transforming into a site for nostalgia. It was changing for Americans from a new raw place into a place with a history of its own, with a rich and important past and a fitting subject for lore and legend. I want to review briefly what happened, not only what gave this historical period vitality and shape, but also what made Samuel Clemens such a central figure in how we remember it, how we continue to imagine it. I think there are 4 developments here to bear in mind. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803, the invention and the fast adoption of steam power for travel on rivers, the rapid spread of the American telegraph and rail systems, and finally the mid-century revolution in automated, high-speed, low-cost publishing and printing, which changed everything for Sam Clemens as a professional, and also for the national and global spread of the Mississippi legend. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 changed the geographic and imaginative boundary of the United States. Before that, the Mississippi River constituted the western shore of the nation, but now it became the main artery of a vastly expanded country, effectively our very core, not our western edge anymore. And it also became an alluring highway far into the heart of this new United States. And only 4 years after the purchase, the first successful steamboat, launched on the Hudson River by Robert Fulton in 1807, made a huge difference for travel and transport on that new highway. Almost overnight, it became possible to go upstream easily, to move from New Orleans all the way into Wisconsin and Minnesota and even beyond, without weeks of struggle with oars and sails or pushing small vessels slowly along with setting poles. As a result, by the year Sam was born, there were literally hundreds of steamboats moving up and down the water, nearly just less than a quarter mile from his family's house. These were high-tech machines for their time. Mechanical wonders. Soon many of them became ostentatious in their design, with balustrades, wedding-cake pilot houses, ornate chimneys, verandas, filigrees. But they were also dangerous. In the years of Sam's boyhood, hundreds of these boats blew up, burned to the waterline, or crashed or grounded on sandbars or reefs, or strayed irretrievably into flooded fields on foggy nights. But the fleets kept coming, bigger and faster and flashier every year. All of this was like catnip for small-town boys along the shore, hungry for machines and power and noise and danger and connection to the world beyond. It proved to be great material for yarns and nostalgia as the century went on. In that mix, there were also vessels that came to be called showboats, garishly painted, often with buntings and awnings, meandering up and down the river from one town to the next, bringing music, comedy, spectacle, sensation, anything they could get away with to provide entertainment for a price. These were sketchy enterprises, to say the least, but they also became part of the larger romance of the river. Sam was born in 1835. Hannibal, Missouri, his boyhood home, was founded only 5 years earlier, founded as a landing and as a service spot for the new river traffic, a place to load fuel and cargo, to unload merchandise. Many towns along the shoreline sprang up around the same time for the same years. Other things were going on to transform and intensify not only life along the river, but also the cultural reach and impact of a new crop of American writers. I mentioned the rail system and the telegraph. The first railroad in the United States was a short run in Massachusetts in 1830 from Boston to Pittsburgh. By 1850, a rail line had reached all the way to the eastern shore of the Mississippi. And the telegraph, invented only in 1840, was racing across the country in tandem with the rails. These innovations fostered coordination between boat and rail and simplified life for shipping and for travel. But among other things, they also promoted the movement of large stocks of printed material, books, newspapers, magazines, cheaply, rapidly, not only up and down the Mississippi and its tributaries, but also in other directions as the rails spread out into the heartland. And that, combined with revolutionary developments in printing and publishing, made it possible almost overnight to saturate vast stretches of the American landscape and eventually the world with the words of writers. How big a change was this? When Sam was born in 1835, a typical print run for a published book was 1,000 or 2,000 copies, pumped out on manual presses that could produce only about 800 printed sheets in one day of hard work. By the time Sam left Hannibal, however, at the age of 17, to find work as a printer in St. Louis, new automated presses in that city could turn out 5,000, 10,000, even 15,000 sheets in a single hour. Everything in the world of print was getting faster and cheaper. Paper production, sorting, cutting, gathering, binding, illustrating, even eventually typesetting, the trade that Sam had learned as a boy. For a writer, all of this made a huge difference in who you could reach and how much money you might make in this profession. A related development in this print revolution, of importance to creating and spreading the lore of the Mississippi River, was high-resolution chromolithography. I mean, those colorful pictures we associate with the firm of Currier and Ives, the most famous producer of these images. Cheap, handsome illustrations of this kind were turning up in homes and offices everywhere. And a favorite subject was Mississippi River life. Riverboats, races between company flagships, busy times at landings, making headway at night with torches blazing on the bows, lots of strong, evocative visual enhancement for storytelling about life on the river. To come back then to Mark Twain himself. Sam spent his boyhood along the river. When he was in his 20s, he trained as a steamboat pilot, earned his license, commanded a number of boats running between St. Louis, Memphis, and New Orleans before the Civil War. Nonetheless, Mark Twain's first big successes as a writer were books about travel in Europe. His earlier times on the river still had to ripen in his mind. And the river itself had to achieve a past on its own, had to find its own way, at least tentatively, into the fabric of American history and imaginative experience before Mark Twain could write effectively about it. Why has this lasted so long, this strong association between Mark Twain, his legend, and the lore of the Mississippi River? Here's some speculations. Part of it has to do with Mark Twain's connection of the river to the larger adventure of growing up. He was one of the first writers in the English language to celebrate childhood as a special time, to celebrate it as a season of self-invention. Think about other famous stories of childhood from the middle years of the 19th century. David Copperfield, Oliver Twist, Pip and Great Expectations, Jane and Jane Eyre, Tom Brown and Tom Brown's School Days, all of them bestsellers when Sam was a boy and a young man. In each case, these children are victims for much of the time. They get knocked around by circumstance, and eventually they find their way to happiness thanks to the intervention of others, and also thanks to sheer luck. But for Tom Sawyer and for Huckleberry Finn, yes, there are grown-ups around, and strokes of luck do play a part in their adventures, but these boys nonetheless take a real hand in creating themselves, in deciding who they are and where they will go. And that was new. In other words, the Mississippi River in these stories becomes a realm of possibility, of adventure, of personal destiny and fulfillment, of becoming yourself. Just the importance of that theme and the reach and resonance of Mark Twain's Mississippi even now. America, everywhere. The Mississippi and Mark Twain.
Thank you so much, Dr. Michelson, for that wonderful talk about Mark Twain and the Mississippi. I'm sure we'd all like to go home now and read or reread Mark Twain's novels, and certainly to read your work about Mark Twain. Thank you very much.